one last team to go for. I don't really have a clever transition because I did, but it's not my first point, so I can't transition right into it. We're just going to jump over to Austin FC, a team that one of our hosts, definitely not me, predicted to win the entire West at one point, uh, as well as giving plaudits to basically every player in their back line, saying that they were going to be world beaters. And I believe that was all Connor. Is
I
that about right? You remember it that way?
I may or may not have had Austin first. I'm actually checking now because I feel like I might have had them first.
I think we both did, if I'm going to be honest with you.
I don't remember praising the back line, but I do remember you cursing.
No, that was you. You said
No,
Kid
no, no.
Keller was going to be top 10.
You cursed Keller's entire career.
All right. While you do that, I'm going to talk about the fact that they're in this what I call a third year slump. The first year, it was expected they were going to struggle a little bit. They did. Year two, they lit it up, and they seemed to have stepped it up even further in the off season, and it never got quite to the level that they expected. Part of me believes that the high of being so good so early died off, and they just came straight back down to earth. Druisi went from 25 goals in 2022 to 13, which makes way more sense. Fagundes went from 7 and 13 to 3 and 1 before being shipped to LA, which is right about where his numbers have been the last few years, if not like a touch below. Um, to me, if this team doesn't overachieve, because I think we can all agree they overachieved in their second year, if they don't overachieve in 2022, I don't think anybody's freaking out about this side finishing the season in contention for the playoffs until the second to last week. But they rode that high through 2022 and finally just came back down to earth in 23. They've got some key points to address in the offseason, but I think just oh my God, we're so good, we're so good, we're so good has finally worn off. And now they're like, okay, we actually have some holes we need to fill.
Yeah, I think a nice middle ground would be good for them because I mean I don't think that their roster is as bad as they looked this season, but I definitely think to your point they overplayed in 2022. So probably a middle ground is a good, I would say, pretty accurate areas where the team is at the moment. My first point for them is about their defense. They have conceded 54 goals so far this season, which I believe is the third worst in the Western Conference. So, I mean, just flat out, this team was not good enough defensively to make it to the playoffs. Are there teams with worse defensive records that are currently in the playoffs? Yes. However, they didn't have enough of attack to make up for their poor defense. And that's not me saying that I think their attack is poor, because it was very much not. They scored tons of goals this year, not as many as last year, but plenty enough that they should have been in the playoff picture with a solid defense. Cascante and Väisänen were just not good enough in the defensive metrics. And while Hedges would have been another good option at center back, he barely played for Austin with less than 300 minutes. Add to that their fullbacks were mainly Nick Lima, who is historically and currently an attacking fullback, not a defensive one, and John Gallagher, who is a winger made fullback. There was just not enough of a defensive presence in his team to keep them from conceding 54 goals in the season. In my opinion, I think a solution that could maybe work for them is maybe a 5 at the back. And I think that would allow Lima and Gallagher to venture forward with less defensive responsibility. Looking at transfer market, they mostly played a 4-3-3 this season. So I think maybe a 5 at the back could be a good opportunity for them to allow the attacking fullbacks to go forward and not leave holes in the defense. And this could even include Julio Cascante, who had great attacking numbers this season and was a great attacking threat. If he wanted to venture forward, it would still leave Hedges and Väisänen in the defense, with Johan Valencia as well to help in defensive support. So I think that can maybe be a way for them to still utilize a good attack while minimizing the defensive holes.
Tell them what you want, Grace. Tell them what you think. Hold on,
Grace, what's your point number one?
whisper it in my ear. Okay, tell them. Did you hear that? She said, funnily enough, point number 2 is defensive nightmares. Um, so as I mentioned, I'm blaming Connor on this one for putting the curse of Austin FC um, on both the team and the individual players. But from day one, Austin FC's defensive issues were on full display. The loss of Gabrielson last year was way more of a hit than most people realized it was going to be. And they thought that they replaced it with Väisänen, but boy, were they off. The pairing of Väisänen and Cascante was usually the main pairing, and they were, as you mentioned, they weren't good enough. But they did flip in 4 other center backs throughout the year, all who had their own issues. Even though Kip Keller was predicted by Connor to have a breakout year and be a top 10 center back in the league, he was not ready to get big time minutes. Amro Tarek played 66 minutes, scored a brilliant own goal, and was sent packing. Matt Hedges slid in at the end of the year and was mid. I mean, did you know that Alexander Radonovich was even in the team? I didn't. And then Brandon Craig on loan, no appearances. Like they couldn't figure it out in the back. We mentioned it on Monday that picking and placing pieces, trying to figure out your best 11 and shapes and all that stuff. If you don't get it down pat by like the first third of the year, you're looking for trouble. They have conceded the 3rd most goals in the Western Conference. And as we mentioned with LA, ask anybody who has defensive trouble. That is a surefire way to find yourself on the outside looking into the playoff picture.
Nice. Maybe you'll take my point after I mention this one too. You could hit us with another funneling. But my point number 2 is their lack of striker this season. Sebastian Driussi has proven that he can ball out in this league. And this season was a step back for him. But he still had a very respectable 15 goal contributions. I think he did not get enough help from the other attackers around him, namely Giassi Zardes. Now the teams have found a way to contain Driussi much better than they did in 2022. He needs someone else to help take more of the attention from the defense, in my opinion. And I think a big-time striker can do that. I think this will open up more space for Driussi, and it will also help Ethan Finley and Emiliano Rigoni get more space as well. But Zardes' 6 goals in 1,500 minutes, I think, was not garnering enough attention from defenses and allowed them to focus more on stopping Sebastian Driussi. In my opinion, a solution that could work for them maybe is to get Alex Ring off of a designated player contract and go find a striker with that designated player spot. I think this will return Austin's attack to where it was. It'll put it more in the direction of where it was in 2022. And like I mentioned with the last point, I don't think the attack was bad this season. But if they're going to leak goals like they did, then they're going to need to have an explosive attack similar to like what Atlanta or Columbus have brought this season. While conceding lots of goals, they've scored way more. So I think bringing in a big-time striker would help with that a lot.
Funnily enough,
No, you're lying on that one. I don't believe you.
Not my 3rd point.
Yeah.
My 3rd point is a team that lacked confidence. And I'll explain it a little bit here. Teams that have experience in big games know how to stop skids, make bad situations manageable, prevent themselves from falling into slumps, and can turn things around relatively quickly before it becomes an actual problem. Austin FC are not a team with a ton of experience. We know this because they've only been around for 3 years, and it showed. So I'll start with CCL. They make the CONCACAF Champions League in their 2nd season, and it was just purely miserable. They played a Haitian team called Violette, who on their own were not awful, but playing at a neutral site because of, I can't even remember the reason why, but it was either the stadium was broken or they were kicked out or something along those lines. They play at an awful neutral site where the biggest thing I remember is a massive freaking tree behind the Did you watch that game?
I'm trying to like remember what I saw from the highlights of it.
So you start looking like towards the left-hand side of the goal. and it pans. You see stadiums and fans and bleachers, and all of a sudden it all stops. And the other end, right behind the goal, is a massive freaking tree. Like huge. It like over the shadow goes onto the stadium type of huge. And it's like, where are these guys playing? And they got killed 3-0. Amro Tarek scored his aforementioned own golazo, and they were just shell shocked heading into the round of 16 second leg, but that's okay because they have the next leg at home where they were so dominant the season before. And Violette couldn't travel with most of their squad due to visa issues. So they signed semi pro players to make up the numbers on the bench. Austin was only able to score 2 goals and got knocked out on aggregate. Purely embarrassing, really. I can see you're looking things up in your glasses. Your reflection is popping out.
I'm trying to find the
I
highlights
hope
so
you
that I
can
can see the
find it.
big
I'll
tree.
send you the. I have it somewhere, so I'll send it to you if we can't find it.
Don't worry, I will find the big tree.
Then we go to Leagues Cup. Leagues Cup was a chance for them to turn it around and push for the top 4 in the West because at the time they were right in the thick of things. They could have gone and gone on a run here. They were drawn with 2 Mexican sides who were perennial bottom dwellers in their league, of which Austin was expected to come out on top, smooth as can be, straight into the knockout rounds. They lost both games relatively embarrassingly, if I remember correctly, and they were bounced before they can even get to the round of 32. And then there was the end of the year run. As soon as Leagues Cup was over, they had, a 2-3 week break, and they went back to MLS play, where they were a straight up shell of themselves. They had 1 win in 10 games since the embarrassing Leagues Cup run, and the only win came against fellow playoff eliminees, DC United. They had a bunch of embarrassing results, including 6-3 drubbing against St. Louis and a 4-2 loss to LAFC. Austin FC went from rough to bad to worse this season. They snowballed into a hot mess to end the season, and because of it, they are not going to be in the 2023 playoffs.
Funnily enough, took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, right.
Also, I see the big tree. No, but I am serious. My last point was bad losses, and it's almost essentially exactly like you were talking about. I think this summed up their season very well. And throughout this entire year, they had multiple very bad losses to teams that they should be beating. And exactly like you were talking about, I think the most notable one, of course, is that of losing to the Haitian side, Violette AC in CCL, who were able to complete one of the biggest CCL upsets in history. And this was only, you don't have to show me the picture. I saw
big tree.
I saw the big tree.
Look at the big tree.
You're interrupting my last point. So when they had lost in CCL, this was only a few weeks after they had gifted 3 points to the new boys, St. Louis City, in the opening game of the season, which I'm sure we all very much remember. That was massive. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of people were watching as well because that was the start of Apple TV. So not great. And then later on in the season, as you had talked about as well, they lost to FC Juarez and Mazatlan in the Leagues Cup. Both teams that Austin should be beating. They are better than both of those teams. And yet I believe they lost both games 3-1. And I'm sure that these losses have to take a toll on the team's morale. And I think having those losses throughout the year just kept the morale at a low point for them. And honestly, in terms of a solution, I mean, the obvious one is like, just don't lose those games next year, right? But I guess a more practical solution could be having a strong locker room leader, maybe somebody like Matt Hedges, who could just kind of help keep the morale of the team higher. And if and or when they suffer bad losses, they have somebody who has some experience in being able to get past that and not get the team in a rut.